post-Cold War order. That order is not there anymore. But we don't exactly know what the new order is either. And from history, I think we know that between orders there is a lot of disorder. There's competition for power. It's also competition for then being the most competitive nation economically and etc. We also heard earlier today at the opening plenary that the global economy is doing better than we expected a year ago, but geopolitically we are facing a kind of a recession. So the biggest risk for the global economy now is that geopolitically something comes out of control. And we were very close to this a few weeks ago. That could have ended in a full-fledged war between Israel and Iran. Fortunately, that did not happen. But it doesn't mean that those challenges are not there anymore. I think we're not out of the woods. We also know that there is competition between the two largest economies in the world, the so-called G2, US and China. It's 40% of the global economy. So it's not insignificant. We'll have Secretary Blinken arriving tomorrow. We also have seen in the last weeks there's been big discussions about Ukraine, and I think EU is also looking at how they prepare themselves for a situation where EU will take more responsibility for its own security. So we have an amazing panel to discuss this. To my right, we have Josep Borrell. He is the High Rep of the European Union and a key player in this. Then we have, almost doesn't need a presentation here, at least not in the Kingdom, His Highness Prince Faisal Al Saud, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia. And then we have Mr. Ali Sabri, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka. And then we have Qian Liu, the expert economist with a focus on China, former managing director of the Economist Group in China. So, I think we are, of course, all interested in trying to see the implications medium long term on the current situation, but we also need to understand what is really going on. And in the region, I would like to start with you, Your Highness. I mentioned the Iran-Israel situation that could have escalated. We don't even know what that would have ended in. Not all nations do have an Iron Dome, to put it that way, but this also was collaboration there we haven't seen in a long time. I think we're all now very much following the latest Egyptian proposal for a ceasefire and release of hostages that is now with Hamas, and we're also told that if that is not agreed on, you can have a full escalation of the war in Gaza again, with Israel then starting to go into Raqqa. We know that the Kingdom plays a pivotal role here. Israel also wants a deal with Saudi Arabia, but I guess that doesn't come for free. Maybe we could start then with the current situation in Gaza, your reflections of what did not escalate with Iran. Secretary Blinken coming tomorrow, wanting also to work on a possible comprehensive deal with GCC and especially Saudi Arabia, but I guess that deal will also have to be a real path towards peace between the Israelis and also the Palestinians. So on those few easy questions, over to you.
And in 2 minutes or less.
On that one, you can get 2.5.
You're too generous, Borger. Look, situation in Gaza obviously is a catastrophe by every measure. Humanitarian, but also a complete failing of the existing political system to deal with that crisis. Is that a reflection of what you mentioned, that we are in transition, or is it a reflection that the existing bodies of international governance are inadequate? That's something maybe we will go into in the panel as well. Certainly the situation as it is now is already catastrophic, and we are facing an exponential expansion of it if we see an incursion into Gaza, which is possible if we don't reach a ceasefire imminently. We hear that there's a proposal on the table. We hope that that proposal is sufficient for the ceasefire to come into place. But even if we have a ceasefire, we still have to deal with the repercussions of the conflict, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, beyond, in our region. We speak about impacts well beyond the current situation. So we have to work to address that. And one of the, and again, one of the frustrations that we have, and I'm sure many others have, is that the international mechanisms of security have not worked, even on something as basic as humanitarian access. The crisis is now in its 7th month, and we still are in an unending discussion of whether or not enough trucks are getting into Gaza. This is completely unreasonable and unacceptable. So the situation is dire, and there is potential for it to become even worse. That said, we in the region are not going to focus only on solving the crisis of the moment. We are going to look at how we can solve the bigger problem in the context of Gaza, that is a real commitment to a two-state solution. That is a credible, irreversible path to a Palestinian state. That's the only reasonable and credible solution that guarantees us from not having to come back to this same situation 2, 3, 4 years down the line. It's good that we hear most of our partners in the international community support that notion. Now we have to translate that into reality, and that's what we're engaged on. That's what we'll talk to Tony with. That's why Joseph is here. Our European partners are engaged. But we need to move from talk to action, to concrete steps, and it can't be left up to the warring parties. It has, we, the international community, and especially those countries that have the most influence, the most impact, the Security Council, has to step in. So that's briefly on Gaza, but I want to touch quickly on some of the points you made, first in the regional context. Certainly in our region, when it comes to the kingdom, but many others, we are focused on not competition, not conflict, but competition, on working, or rather on working on economic growth, economic development, and on being part of the transition from the old world order, as you've called it, to the new world order. And I think what's important in the broader context is that we make sure that it is competition, not conflict. Competition, if managed properly, can be a healthy thing. It can deliver benefits for all interested parties. It lowers costs, it delivers innovation and better investment. So that's where we need to focus. We need to focus on ensuring that this transition leads into competition, and where necessary to face global challenges, cooperation. And a good example is climate change, but also, of course, peace and security. We can compete and cooperate, and there are examples in our region. So that's I think, where we should focus our intention.
Thank you very much, and I think that's also the Vision 2030 that, as you mentioned, we saw numbers coming out now that the kingdom has, 6 years before the plan, been able to 50% of the economy, GDP, is now coming from the non-oil and gas sector. But, there is no economic development if there is war and conflicts. And we know that no country in the world that is in a war has met the Sustainable Development Goals or the MDGs. So thank you. I'm then moving to you, Youssef Borrell. You heard the Saudi foreign minister saying that we can deal with competition. We always had competition. But conflict we will need to avoid. We are in a transitional period. We don't know what this new order will be, but currently there is a lot of disorder. So how to deal with that? And also the European Union is a big actor in this, but also has been through a rough time. The gas was coming from Russia, the security was coming from DC, and China was an important market. So there is a lot of pivoting necessary also in the EU, and there is a growing discussion about strategic autonomy, like Macron mentioned, or maybe European interdependence that I think you and von der Leyen has mentioned. So where do you see this going, and what is the European vision on this new order?
Look, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful place and conference. When I was a child, the world was divided between the North, the East, and the West. East and West, each one with an atomic bomb, facing each other. Later, the South emerged, and we start talking about North and South. And now we talk North, South, East, West, which shows that there is not a clear understanding of the world as it is. Competition, good. The problem is not competition. The problem is confrontation. And there is confrontation because there are many and more poles, actors, and less rules. And the rules are not enforced. The power has been redistributed, and an engineer will be the system naturally tends to be more disorder. More actors, less rules, disorder. Which are the consequences of this new scenario? First, the distribution of power has changed the relations of forces in benefit of Asia, mainly what we call the North or the Northwest has been decreasing its importance. Southeast Asia has increased, China also, and competition has become a conflict, and the war among states is back. Russia against Ukraine, let's hope that nothing like this could happen in the Middle East. But by the time being, we have another war, not an interest state, because Palestine is still not a state, but it's a war of high intensity with many casualties. There is a real danger that the war among states becomes a reality. We should not open the Pandora box of new wars. Second, is a war not only with arms, bombs and rockets, is a war about narrative, is a war about memories, about experiences. And we see here in the region that it's very difficult to overcome this kind of heritage. Geography matters. I've been told geography doesn't matter anymore, globalization, blah, blah, blah. In Ukraine, it's a fight for the land. And here in Gaza and in Palestine, it's a war for the land. Two people who are fighting for the same land. And the only solution is to share this land. The third implication is that many people in the South believe that this new scenario gives them more opportunities, and they are hedging. They don't want to be in one side for everything, everywhere, all the time. It depends. Maybe for that it will be with you, maybe it will be against you for another reason. And the small powers don't see the interest of abiding by the rules if the great powers don't do it. And then this makes the world more transactional, less multilateral, less agreement, less rules, and more transactions. And the big risk of decoupling. Decoupling from the technological point of view, two big different blocks. Decoupling from the point of view of trade, decoupling from the point of view of values. This requires, in order to overcome this situation, more trust. Yes. Why we have lost trust? Because we have discovered that dependencies become a weapon. If I trust you, I don't care if I am dependent on you, because I trust you. But when I see that my dependency from you is being used as a weapon against me, then dependencies becomes dangerous. And I reduce dependencies, and that's why the whole world tends to isolate each other on this decoupling economically from the point of view of values, narrative, traits. And this is bad for the humankind, because never as today we need more cooperation. Climate, demography, technology, everything requires more cooperation, and we have less cooperation and trust. What we have to do is to start respecting the existing rules, to change many of them which are not adequate for the world the way it is, which is not the world as it was when I was born in the 40s. But we don't have to invent the wheel. Many things could work if they work. And why don't work? Because there is a big gap between what we say and what we do. We cannot preach by example because we are not perfect. But let at least to say that we, the Europeans, we have not used our veto right in the Security Council for years and years. And we have not been blocking any initiative with respect to the war in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a short follow-up question. I guess the calculus also has changed in Europe. Europe burned its fingers on not diversifying its energy. I guess
certainly
Europe also has exported a lot to certain markets that has to be diversified, and a lot of the eggs on the security side is based in Washington, D.C. So how is Europe going to deal with that, but still then as the largest market in the world, and it's also 17% of the global economy, so it's still a really big player, but it's only strong if also it keeps together. And there is different views, and you also have populist forces in Europe, but there's also more expectations on Europe from the global south, from the east, to also be able to play an important role in this very fragile world of competition. So I'm really curious if you think Europe will is it ready for this role, and how will it play that role?
It's true that there is a caricature saying that Europeans have been basing our prosperity on the cheap gas coming from Russia, on the security umbrella coming from Washington, and the great market opportunity and investment coming from China. It's a caricature, but as every caricature has certain elements of being true. Yes, we have been building a strong dependency on Russian gas, 40% before the war. Now it's less than 10%. Yes, we have been relying a lot on the security provided by NATO, and maybe it's not going to be always like this, depending who is ruling Washington. And yes, certainly China has offered some members of the European Union a great opportunity to export technology and to be expanding trade and economy and prosperity. We have to adapt to a new world. Everybody has to do it. Certainly the world of the future will be based more on renewables than in fossil fuels, but there is still a long way to go. Certainly we have to take our part of the burden and be more responsible with respect to our own security, and this requires to put the capacity, resources, and the political will. And third, we have to understand that the world economy today is based on a lot of new champions and countries who have shown an incredible capacity of technological innovation. All that requires the Europeans to be more united, and this will be a little bit my legacy. Be more united, please, because you are too small to survive in a world of giants. Take more into consideration the priorities of the other people, because many times it's not a matter of values, it's a matter of priorities, and others don't share your same priorities, and try to go hand in hand your speech and your actions.
Thank you, Xian. We know that one of the big contests, and maybe the biggest of this century, is now between the two so-called superpowers, at least economically and increasingly military, the US and China. 40-45% of the global economy. Secretary Blinken will arrive tomorrow from his visit. He saw President Xi Jinping, also spent considerable time with then Foreign Minister Wang Yi. How do you see this relationship developing? I think President Biden has seen its extreme competition between the two nations. That's the term he used. It's still competition, not conflict, but extreme competition. Do you see a future where there will be competition and collaboration, or do you foresee increased escalation in the conflict between these two big powers? And of course, we know there's an upcoming election also in the US, and there is less growth in China than it used to be, but is still growing.
Thank you for the question. Let me borrow the starting line of Vice President of when I was a child. When I was a child, that was a time when China was so poor. We didn't have enough food or meat. We could even only have meat for dumplings and new clothes during the Chinese New Year. That was a time when China was just starting to open up and grow. And that was a time when learning American accent English was a lot more popular than learning the British accent. People looked up to the dominant power of the U.S. China wanted to grow and wanted to become better. And back at school, you'd be the popular kid if you speak English, and you will be chosen to welcome a delegation of American students. But time have changed big time. 2008 was a big sort of milestone there. When the great financial crisis happened, all of a sudden China realized, wait a second, we are able to find ways to grow ourselves out of it. But look at the economies that we used to look up to, especially Europe and US. US didn't handle it very well. Still nowadays, there are certain countries within Europe that 2008 till now, 16 years, certain European countries, their GDP and income still have not recovered to the pre-2008 levels. So that was a big time when China's perceptions and sentiments towards itself and towards the world have changed. And back to what you're asking about US and China. I'm usually an optimist, but not so on the US-China relationships. I fear that situations will get worse before it becomes better again. Even though at the moment we're seeing the bilateral conversation have resumed, especially after COVID, I fear that is very temporary. Especially, you mentioned this is an election year. With all the polarization going on in the US, if anything, China is the only thing that unites the United States of America. Like, that is the one thing that the two parties can agree on. And so the negative sentiment on China is unfortunately the thing that will continue to be, and the election year will just fire that up even more. And on China's side, I fear that if the economy will not grow as quickly, as stably as people would like, then the temptation would be to use U.S. as an scapegoat. So with that being in the picture, I'm not very optimistic about U.S.-China relationship. And we look around the world. How can we sort of balance that out? In a physics perspective, right, the most solid format and relationship is a triangle. So in a multipolar world that we live right now, we have U.S. and China. What and who would be the third polar? Before we were looking at Europe, hoping Europe would be the solid third polar. But there are times that even within Europe, the nations have different interests and priorities. So Europe may not necessarily always be the third angle that we go to. And perhaps it would be the third countries or the third nations that are stuck in between. Many countries have unfortunately been stuck in this bilateral relationship. They have been forced to choose side, and we've seen a lot of disruptions when it comes to supply chains, technologies, economies, et cetera, and many more. Some countries have benefited a bit out of it, but overall, globally, the world is suffering from a not so healthy China-U.S. relationship, and I think, in a way, for the third nations to also come up together and tell U.S. and China. You know, we say sometimes international relations are like marriages of conveniences. Then for the other friends, it's about time to come together and tell the couple, we've had enough. You need to come together and find solutions. Otherwise, you're not serving yourselves or the world collectively. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You referenced when you grew up and China was still a developing country. Today, China is around a little bit more than $10,000 US per capita, maybe 12, 13. The big question is, will China be able then to go into a $30,000, $40,000 US economy? So there are those that are concerned that it can end up in like a middle income trap. And if you look at the fundamentals today in China, what's your view? Do you think China will continue to grow at a speed where it can then become like a upper middle income country? There are things working for China in that respect. 12 million students graduating every year, 2 million of them being engineers, being also quite leading in some of the new technologies. But then you see the shrinking workforce. We also see challenges on our investment in some areas. Where do you see this socialist market economy going? Because that's a challenging thing to also make sure that all these different priorities come together in a policy that leads to exceptional growth. And second, if that growth is not coming, you say that there is also then reasons to be concerned that you could see some Machiavelli steps, knowing that if you have a problem at home, you can always then, of course, be more looking at mobilizing your country towards something outside your country. So that would be interesting to hear.
Yes, that is a very important question. So especially after COVID, people ask, where is Chinese economy? Where is it going? And the answer, in a way, depends on what your reference point is. If people are looking at China before COVID, sort of 6%, 8%, or even 10%, that is not possible at all. And in fact, when we look at the current statistics, for instance, the youth unemployment rate is beyond 20%. Last year, China grew by 5.2%, much slower compared to before. And when you go to sort of big shopping malls, luxury goods shops, before you have to wait in line, and now there's places that feels very empty. So it's very, very different from before COVID. But then there's the other argument saying that Chinese economy is collapsing, and I would completely disagree with that. Even with 5.2% growth of China, you mentioned China's average income. So just to put things into perspective, China's GDP is about $18 trillion US a year. That is the second largest economy in the world, and larger than number 3, 4, 5, 6 combined. That is Germany, Japan, India, and the UK. And with just 5% of China's growth. Every year China grows an additional, we're in Saudi right now, every year China grows an additional Saudi economy. And World Economic Forum's Switzerland, every year China produces an entire new Switzerland. So that
maybe
is
better to use that latter example.
No, but so the idea is that given the sheer size of China, 5% is phenomena. And 20 years ago when China joined WTO, it was only 4% of the global economy, and right now it's 18%. So there are a lot of problems in the Chinese economy, but there's still quite some engines sort of going on. The problem right now is there is a lack of confidence, consumers, investors, etc. So the problem is how to get those back. But unless there goes with a hard landing scenarios, otherwise China is on its way to overtake U.S. as the largest economy in about 15 years' time or so. And I think it's a critical time for us to review China's rise. As you said, I do believe that the rise of China will be one of the key defining themes of this century. And China is finding its way and is learning how to deal with the rise of its power, how to use that power, and how to integrate with the rest of the world. And China does make mistakes, a lot of mistakes. All countries do, but China's mistakes would be a lot more noticeable and consequential. At the same time, I think it's also very important for other countries to review the rise of China and accept that China is rising, and learn to give room, if not to welcome the rise of China. And I think that in the longer term would give the entire world and humanity a more balanced power structure, and China will do things differently. May not always be the way that the current existing world order likes, but it will be different, and the rise of China is here to stay.
Thank you. Thank you for that very thoughtful answer. Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, we are saying that in South Asia and also in Asia, we have several examples where another very fast growing economy, the fastest growing of the large economies in the world now, by the way, India with 8%. We're seeing more and more India and China meeting each other. We're seeing it in Bangladesh, we see it in Nepal, we see it in Myanmar, but definitely also in the Maldives and in Sri Lanka. And as Sri Lanka has been in the middle of this, we had huge investments, FDIs from China, but you've been through a very tough economic period with a lot of structural changes. So maybe 2 words, because I think we need to know if you're getting out of the woods, or I guess there is like a light in the tunnel now on the economy side, but then how do Sri Lanka as an island but an important country in this region maneuver between India and China? That would be interesting. I'm not so sure how interested you are in sharing all your thoughts on it, but please feel free.
I think, first of all, thank you very much for that question, and I also must use this opportunity to congratulate my friend, His Highness, and the government of Saudi Arabia for having this wonderful conference here, and also WEF to bring in this in outside the traditional venues, so that there is a new perspective coming in. These topics would not have been discussed with this detail if it is not in Saudi Arabia. So therefore, congratulations on that for both organizers. Yes, Sri Lanka, compared to what we were 2 years ago, had come out of the woods. Our inflations are really under control, which was 70% running. Now it's about 2.5%. Our rupee had appreciated about 25% during the last 2 years. Tourists are coming back, and there are a lot of competition in Sri Lanka for investment from global powers. I see as an opportunity. It comes, of course, there is strategic autonomy for all of us, like the Europe, Sri Lanka also. We would like to work as a sovereign state with everyone. We would like to have multiple choices. I know sometimes it's very difficult. Probably we are being coerced or at least attempts are made for us to take choices which are not very voluntarily. I think no global South country would appreciate that. We would always like to take those choices which is available to us with everyone, with the global South and the global North. So if you ask me about the global South perspective, there is a lack of confidence between two global North and the North. Yes, there is. That comes with a lot of reasons. There is very little walking the talk. We always see a lot of lectures as to how you should govern your country, democratic values, human rights, green energy, climate change, but very little in terms of delivering on it. Countries in the global South need the support of the global North on having access to low-cost funding, debt relief, transition of latest technology, the digital divide. So I think this is time for the global North to walk the talk and collaborate with it. I do agree during the last, as you told at the beginning of your introduction, since the end of the Cold War, the world has seen a relative calm and peace. Peace and stability is very, very important. As a result of which, as you pointed out in the morning, the economies or the GDPs have grown 8 times despite the challenges. The foremost of that and the precondition was peace and stability. So as we, members of the Global South, would like and request the Global North and the players who have so much of power, with great power comes great responsibility, don't close the channels of diplomacy. Open channels of communication. Decoupling could be suicidal. De-risking, I do understand that. You can't put all your eggs into one basket. So it is there, Global South also will probably benefit. Once you decouple, I don't know, the growth will affect, and that will actually affect your market. For example, if you take the Chinese-US competition, one of the biggest market for the American, one of the proudest product of iPhone is in China. So China growing is good for US also and some of their product. So therefore, what we would urge as Global South, that people who matters and the powers who matters sit and talk about it and avoid double standard. And we always take up this position, and I always advocated the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because that's the underlying problem. Until you resolve that and give effect to the 1967 UN resolution of two-state solution, as His Highness shared his views, you will probably have a short-term pause, but it will recur with even greater vengeance. So we don't want that. We need to once and for all a solution to this, and the same kind of a solution to the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. So we need a world which promote peace, not confrontation, which collaborate, which compete, but not confront each other. That's the perspective of the Global South whenever we talk to our friends in the Global South and the countries in the Global South.
Well, thank you very much, Minister. Unfortunately, the last minutes I will deal with 2 wars, one in Ukraine and the other one in Gaza. The latter, I think, as the Minister just now alluded to, and I think I heard His Highness mentioning this also earlier, the situation between the Israelis and the Palestinians and the lack of a two-state solution is, of course, also an important source of a lot of the conflicts we're seeing in the region, and also legitimization from different players for their actions. But I'll come back to that. But we haven't spent a lot of time on the second war in Ukraine, and Mr. Vice President Youssef, the Americans decided last minute to contribute with 62 or 61 more, the 62 billions of support to Ukraine. But we also know that every war needs to come to an end. but what kind of end can we see of this Ukraine war without compromising on territorial integrity and at the same time sending a signal to Mr. Putin that this cannot go on, but at the same time there also will need to be solutions. Do you see any solutions, or is it too early to talk about them? They need to continue this for some more time.
That's a question for Mr. Putin or for me?
I think it's for you since he's not here. And I'm not sure if he would have answered it either. I do guess a bit what the answer would have been, but we'll draw on your experience and insight.
Look, it's a moment in my life that I will never forget. 2 weeks before the war started, I was in the Donbass. I was visiting Ukraine. It was on the 6th of January. The war started 1 month later.
Yeah, you have to talk a little bit louder.
I was in Donbass. And the drums of war were already there. You could see through the window. And I had a meeting on the Prime Minister's office. And he asked me a simple question. They are going to invade us. They are going to invade us, be sure. When this happens, what are you going to do? Are you going to ask us to surrender? Or are you going to support us, not with soldiers, I know, but with the military capacity we need to defend ourselves? What are you going to do? White flag or support? At that moment I couldn't give an answer. Later we gave an answer. We support you. And I think that we have to continue giving this answer. Otherwise, the history of the world will be completely different. And I don't know when Putin will stop this war, because he started the war. I'm afraid that he will wait for the American elections, at least. And in the meantime, we have to continue supporting the people in Ukraine. The Europeans will not go to die for the Donbass, but we could avoid the Ukrainians to have to die for the Donbass longer. And I know this is a difficult question, and many people could say, well, for how long do we have to spend so much money? Well, if we committed to support Ukraine when the war started, we have to continue supporting Ukraine until the Ukrainians are able to resist. And until Putin decides to stop this war. But it will not happen soon. Sorry.
No, thank you. I'm also conscious about the time. I would love this to go on a little bit further. Also heard, Josef, your view on the China, but I said that we will also have the last words on the other war going on in Gaza. I think this time, though, Prince Faisal, the war is different. Last time, there was also an international willingness to rebuild Gaza without any guarantees for a path for a two-state solution. No understanding really between Hamas and the Israeli government. The international community spent billions of US dollars to then just rebuild. The devastations were not at that level as today, but it was still a lot of investments needed to rebuild the electricity system, water sanitation, a lot of buildings. But today there is a total disaster. It is a war zone. And what will happen with the 2.5 million people there if there is no appetite also from the donors to start to rebuild this without the political path? What kind of future will the people there have? And of course it increases the pressure on a political solution, but you, as we know from negotiations, you can bring the horses to the well, but you cannot force them to drink the water. And with the current government in Israel, I think there is maybe not the biggest appetite on negotiations for a two-state solution. We will also need to know more clearly if there's a majority in the cabinet in favor of that. But if you look at the path forward, I guess the GCC and especially also Saudi have a lot of incentives for Israel if they agree on this. So it would be interesting to hear your best case scenario and the worst case scenario and the most realistic scenario.
I mean, I'm not going to go into scenarios, but I will try and answer some of those questions. First, on reconstruction, there's a UN report out just very recently that says that just to remove the rubble will take 15 years. Reconstruction, possibly up to 30 years. So this idea that we can talk about half measures and to discuss, well, where are the 2.5 million people of Gaza going to go, without addressing how we make sure that something like this doesn't happen again, I think that's patently ridiculous. And anybody who tries to take that approach, I think, is sincerely misguided. And certainly from our perspective, it is in everybody's interest in the region. Our interest, the interest of the Palestinians, the interest of the Israelis, the interest of the global community of nations, that we find a pathway to resolve this issue once and for all, because that's the only way we are going to avoid, first of all, a repeat, but also we're going to avoid that the suffering that has happened on all sides happens in vain. This is just not an approach that is possible. I want to say that the scenarios and all of these things, it's difficult, but there are pathways and there are mechanisms within the toolbox of the international community that can overcome even the resistance of any party, any spoiler on any side, to stop that path. If we all agree that the Palestinian state and giving the Palestinians their right is the solution that gives everybody what they need, security, stability, their rights, then we should all decide we're going to invest all of our resources in making that happen. And if we make that decision, the pathway will unfold before us, even if there are those that will try to stop it. There are levers clear and there are levers hidden that can push us in that direction. So I want to be hopeful, and I will try to be hopeful, and I know that we as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will do everything we can to push in that direction. And hopefully the international community, given everything that has happened and given the risks involved in not doing the right thing, will come along, and we are working with our partners, the Europeans among them, many others, to try and translate that intent into a reality.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the panel deserves big applause. I really enjoyed every second, even if it was quite dealing with quite a grim reality. But that's the world we're living in. Thank you. Shukran.
We have to try and dream.